So hi, my name is Nicole Trevena Flores. I am the Global Head Coordinator here at SCC, and I want to just remind you all that we have events all week here on campus and well, on Lincoln campus, but we also have events on Milford, downtown, and Seward, Beatrice, excuse me. It's been a rough morning with all these spam emails. I think everybody can relate. But I just wanted to make sure that you pay attention to your email this week when it's not spam, and look at some other opportunities that we have coming up. And then I also want to do a big shout out to the whole Global Ed team for helping to organize all the events this week, and especially Sonal and Lindsay for setting up today. And I will let them go ahead and get started.
Thank you. All right. Well, I'm Lindsay E Wortmann. I'm part of the Global Ed community committee here on campus, as well as Sonala. And today we have two representatives here. One is Sheila Dorsey Vinton, who is the executive director and of the Asian Community Cultural Center and CEO. And then we also have Clayton Naff with us, who is the executive director of Lincoln Literacy. So obviously most of you know that our panel is focused on them discussing their services that they provide at their agencies, as well as, you know, how they're dealing with the needs during this pandemic. So I thought we would just start off by having you both tell us about yourselves, what you do at your organizations, and that you represent. And I guess we could start with Sheila if you want, and then we could go with Clayton next.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for your interest in immigrants and refugees in Lincoln. As Lindsay said, I'm the director of the Asian Community and Cultural Center. The organization's been in Lincoln since 1992. It formed specifically to provide human services to Vietnamese refugees who were resettling at that time, and also to be a place to share culture. All of the, or many of the Asian American leaders in town were meeting and decided that they really wanted a place to share cultural heritage. And at the same time, the Lincoln Interfaith Council was doing this resettlement, and those two groups came together to form the Asian Center. So from our very beginning, we've always been about supporting people with human services, but also the culture sharing aspect of that. The staff at the Asian Center speak over 15 languages, and they are very, very professionally trained in so many different areas to aid people in whatever the person presents them with. We say that we provide holistic help. So when a person comes into the office and they might need their mail translated, we can also find out about their health and if they are getting their doctor's appointments that they need, if they are looking for a job, if they are if they need to be signed up for food benefits, anything that people might need, we try to help with it, because people with a language barrier, sometimes a culture barrier, certainly may not understand all the systems that are in place in this new place where they call home. And so that's what we try to do.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Clayton Naff. I'm the director of Lincoln Literacy. I have been in my position since 2006, which makes this the longest running job I've held. And it's been a joy to do it because the organization itself is wonderful, and the people that we serve and the people who come to us as volunteers are really wonderful. We got started back in 1972 as just a small civic group. And at that time, the focus among the handful of volunteers was to help people who'd grown up here or elsewhere, but hadn't adequately mastered English language literacy. Over the years, the scope of our work expanded as Lincoln became a major refugee resettlement center. And as we experienced the same wave of immigration that the rest of the nation did through the 90s and into the 2000s. Today, the people that we serve are overwhelmingly refugees and immigrants. Fewer than 1 in 10 is a homegrown American, although we value everyone who comes to us, whether they grew up here or in another country. But the fact is that for quite a long time, we have mainly helped immigrants and refugees first master the English language and then go on to whatever interests they may have after that. In recent years, we have really focused on the skills that people need to first lift their families and themselves out of poverty, and then to attain whatever dream they may have for their lives. And we integrated all of that work into a project called the Bridgeway to a Better Life that we started right in the teeth of the pandemic gale last year. Lindsay, I don't know if this is the time you wanted us to talk about it, but the pandemic certainly presented some tremendous challenges. And one of the things that it did was to press us to move our classes online. So now we have online classes as well as in-person classes at various sites, including at our partners, the Asian Center, where we hold classes Tuesday and Thursday evenings. But we continue to offer people online learning opportunities as well. And I guess I'll leave it there for now and unpack some other things as we go along.
Thank you both. But can you expand a little bit more on those challenges that you faced during pandemic, and what population was impacted the most?
For sure. Sheila, do you want to speak to that first, or shall?
Sure, I can do that. Well, at the Asian Center, we have most of our staff trained as community health workers, and we've had a partnership that's been longstanding with the health department. And so we really utilized our community health workers to get the messages out about the pandemic early on. We're all feeling like we're experts, even though we're all still learning. We keep learning more every day about coronavirus and COVID-19. But way back in March, when this all started, and we didn't know what was going on, there still is so much misinformation out there, and so we've been really busy working with the health department in producing materials that we could share with our communities, listening to the communities that we serve, and hearing what rumors and some of the misinformation that some folks had about how to protect themselves, how to protect their families, and really just doing whatever we could to help with that piece. Getting people signed up to get tested, assisting people when they had to quarantine or isolate because they contracted coronavirus. So we would be busy taking out food and cleaning supplies and whatever else we could do to support the families that had to just stay at home because they couldn't send their family members out because they had to quarantine. And all of those things we're still doing now, even though we know a little bit more about how to manage things and how to be safe than we did. There are still families that have to quarantine and that need that extra support with food and other kinds of supplies. And so, yeah, we've been busier than we've ever been, and we're trying to take a moment to regroup and work at a more realistic pace, because we exhausted ourselves, honestly, in trying to make sure that we were there helping everybody that we could help. And we know that we're still in the pandemic. It hasn't ended, but we feel like we can take a little bit of a breather and still work towards all of those same goals, but that we don't have to feel quite as rushed, which is very nice for all of us to relax, regroup, and refresh, and make sure that we're ready to meet the next challenge.
Well, I relate to a lot of what you've just heard from Sheila. For Lincoln Literacy, the challenge was pretty dramatic because everything that we did involved in-person tutoring our classes. But I think before I get to that, it's important to note that the challenge for the people that we serve, mostly English language learners from other countries, mostly minorities, was beyond all doubt a steeper challenge than the average person in Lincoln. The Center Health Department statistics bear this out. For mainstream white residents of Lancaster County, the rate of coronavirus infection has been several points lower than the percentage of the population that they represent. For racial minorities, the percentage of coronavirus infection has been higher in every case. But those are just sort of gross population statistics. In addition to that, you have to take into account the difficulties that transnational families of all kinds experienced. International travel shut down. People who were expecting family members to follow them here as refugees instead have been separated for now going on to 2 years. We, as a nation, invoked some longstanding language in our immigration laws to turn people away at the borders if there was even a suspicion that they might present a health risk. So even people with valid visas who were expecting to reunite with family members were unable to do so. And of course, refugee resettlement all but shut down for the last couple of years. It has finally restarted. And for us as an organization, that's a matter of great satisfaction, but you can only imagine the joy it is for families that have been split up over this time. So on to Lincoln Literacy. We had been trying to encourage our students for several years to make use of online learning tools. Ironically, we realized, oh, we have zero experience with teaching online. So we had to gain that as rapidly as we could and then retrain our volunteer tutors. And then, of course, we faced the challenge of our almost completely low-income student body having access. So we staged, along with partners, including the Asian Center, several drive-through fairs and walk-through fairs in our parking lot so that we could give out information about how to get online in many different languages, but also for those who needed them, Chromebooks. And we ended up giving out well over 100 Chromebooks during the pandemic to families that otherwise couldn't get online. And we started paying for home internet service for those who couldn't connect otherwise. Happily, that number isn't very large because ALLO and then later the federal government made it possible for low-income people to connect, but not everybody lives in a residence served by ALLO. So for the remainder, we're paying for internet service so that they can stay connected. We also had to depart from our long-standing practice of having our classes be English only. And we had two pretty good rationales for that. First, we have a limited time with our students. Since we rely on volunteer tutors, we can't have as many in-class hours as, say, a college, let alone a school typically would. But also we have people from over 70 different nations and territories, and to privilege some languages over others seemed unfair. But the pandemic changed many other things, and it changed that as well. We had to face the stark reality that level English language learners really couldn't do very well with online English classes. And so, with apologies to those who speak less popular languages, if you will, less well-represented languages in our community, we began dual language classes in 7 or 8 different languages. And those include very quickly Arabic, Kurdish, Korean, Spanish, of course, Russian, and Vietnamese, and I'm leaving out one at least, but at any rate, Farsi. So we continue to do that, and they're very popular. I feel bad for the students whose native language is something that we can't produce a language guide for, but we're doing what we can to serve everybody. And we had hoped, as everybody else did, that the pandemic was in the rearview mirror early in the summer, and we reopened on in-person classes. But then we had to shut down again in August because the Delta variant surge was raging through our community and our hospital beds were almost full. So we pulled back to online, and we finally got restarted with in-person classes in mid-October. But we're struggling to get everybody who wants to the place where they want to be for classes. Among the many disruptions that the pandemic has caused is a disruption of the referral and enrollment system that we used to have with many different partners in the community that previously functioned smoothly and now basically needs rebuilding. So those are some of the challenges that we've faced and that the people that we serve have faced.
All right, thank you. I thought maybe you guys could talk just a little bit about the welcoming and acceptance of new immigrants in Nebraska, and how do those coming in feel about being welcomed in this new environment a little bit.
Well, I'll jump in this time and then let Sheila take it. I think by and large, people, especially people who have had to flee their homes and go through the refugee process to get here, overwhelmingly feel grateful, and they feel that they get a warm welcome. Now, clearly not everybody in our community welcomes people from other places. There's fear and misinformation about refugees and immigrants, just as there is about the coronavirus and pretty much anything else that you want to talk about. But Lincoln is, on the whole, a welcoming community. We are officially a welcoming community. Our previous mayor first made that declaration, and our current mayor has warmly reaffirmed it. And the city collaborates with nonprofits such as ours to ensure that we give the best possible welcome to newcomers in need in our community. The refugee resettlement agencies here in Lincoln, they are Lutheran Family Services and Catholic Social Services, are the ones who meet a new refugee family when they get here and find them accommodation and help them with a basic start on life in Lincoln. Typically then they will go into services with Lincoln Literacy, Southeast Community College, Center for People in Need, the Asian Center, the Good Neighbor Center, several other organizations that help newcomers in various ways. Compared with other cities that I've lived in, the nonprofits in Lincoln are really well integrated and collaborate well. Naturally, there are some missteps, and naturally, some newcomers run into difficulties. But by and large, I think as a community, we do a really good job of helping newcomers find their footing here, feel welcome, and begin life again. I will say that the challenge of resettling Afghans in our community is coming at a difficult time. There is very little housing available, and landlords are reluctant to rent to a refugee whose future income is highly uncertain. They do have, I believe, 3 months of guaranteed rent, but after that, they're expected to fend for themselves. And that is a terrifying challenge for somebody who doesn't speak the language, doesn't understand the culture, and doesn't know how to put their skills to work. Even if they were a professional in their home country, their profession might not be recognized here. So it's scary for them, and it creates difficulties for the resettlement agencies to find housing for them. But historically, we've worked it out, and I hope we'll rise to the challenge this time. And with that, I'll let Sheila say whatever she might like to.
Sure, I agree with everything that Clay said about welcoming in our community. I think that our community does pride itself on being a welcoming community. And I think most refugees and immigrants do feel that. But then there is the opposite side and kind of the dark and ugly side as well. So the pandemic has revealed some kind of underlying tensions that have always existed, actually. So, and I'm thinking especially of anti-AAPI hate and the experiences of our clients that have experienced hate. So while we do like to say, yes, we are a welcoming community, it doesn't necessarily always mean that every individual feels welcomed, and that they have in fact experienced people looking at them suspiciously and have those feelings of being unwelcome. I mean, as I think Clay pointed out earlier, when somebody comes to our country as a refugee, they didn't want to come. Like, they would much rather be in their home country with their family and their friends. And this was an emergency situation that caused them to come here and leave everything behind. And, so those feelings can be complicated too. So I think when people arrive, they are grateful to have a safe place, but they're also understandably really frustrated about the process. And there's people who have come, in this case, many people from Iraq and Afghanistan who come as a special immigrant visa. And many people have expectations that go unfulfilled, but promises made to them about, if you help us, then you're going to get all of these things when you go to the United States. And the reality is not really what they've been promised in a lot of cases. So that there are some frustrations and tensions and anger also, in addition to that welcoming piece. And so the good thing is that there are places like the Asian Center and Lincoln Literacy where people develop communities and of support among their peers. In a survey that was conducted by New American Task Force, actually, one of the things that people said is that they wanted to have more contact with Native-born Americans than they did, because they felt a little bit isolated in their own communities and really wanted some friendships. And so those of us on the call, we can work on that. And I think that, that will benefit everybody for sure. So.
Well said.
Yes. That kind of leads me into the next question of what are some of the misperceptions that new immigrants have about Nebraska and Nebraskans that you've found are common among them?
Well, I think that, a lot of people who are coming, their first impressions are what you've seen in the movies, for example, that we're a very violent place, that they might not be safe here. All of those things that you see in the movies may not be an accurate picture, really, of how life actually is. And, a lot of people have never heard of Nebraska before being sent to Nebraska or resettled in Nebraska. We're an under the radar state, right? And actually people are resettled in other places and then decide to move to Nebraska because they heard that it is a great place to come to. So good place to find a job and get education for your kids. And it's pretty safe. Once they get here and figure out that whole, I don't know, the myth versus the reality, and then, settle in and find a place where they have community and can get their kids a good education and themselves a good education, and all of those things.
Yeah, that rings true for me. Two very quick stories. One of my favorite things to do is an intake with a new arrival or a new family. And quite a long time back, I was doing one, and the person who is from an East Asian country asked me, "Where can I get a gun?" And I said, "What?" He said, "Everybody have gun, right?" I said, no, I don't have a gun. You don't need a gun." So one of the less beneficial effects of the global Hollywood market for films is that perception that everybody has a gun and uses it every week. The other was that we decided to try to find out after about a year what refugees found irritating or unfulfilling about their lives here. So we did a survey of our refugees. We didn't come up with anything. And it's not because their lives were perfect, but it was because they wanted to take the advantage of the opportunity to tell us how grateful they are to be here and how much they appreciate the volunteers who help them. America is unusual in its degree of volunteerism, and that really shines in Lincoln. So that loneliness that people naturally experience when they find themselves uprooted from where they grew up and from familiar sites is somewhat offset by the warmth of volunteer help. It's something that no agency can replace with paid staff, and it's one of the treasures of our community.
And I have something to add to it as a former refugee. It's like tornadoes. You know, we were expecting nice weather here, and then we learned about tornadoes. That was something that was really new to us. And it was, wow, we fled because of war and sirens, and then you come here, and then every Wednesday sirens are tested. So just something, you know, different.
You're right, Sanala. And I want to add to that, July 4th, the way that we celebrate it here is terrifying for some people, including me when I first moved here, because we don't do that back where I come from. Sorry, people.
Now, can we look on the other side? But what are some misperceptions about new immigrants in our community? I know you touched on it, Clay, a little bit, but just if you can expand a little bit. Clay, yes.
Okay. Well, one of them is that they don't want to learn English. And of course, that may be true for some, but by and large, they do. And the people who always say they don't want to learn English are more often than not people who have never even tried to learn another language themselves and really don't appreciate how very difficult it is for an adult to learn a language that they didn't grow up speaking. We run into this underlying fear that foreigners are going to change the way that we do things, and it's not going to be the America that we know anymore. That's such a misunderstanding of American history, which consists of nothing but foreigners coming here and changing things. And yet it is America because we are a nation of nations. And there are extensive studies that show that people learn English at pretty much the same rates they always have. But with help, they can learn it faster. There is no group in America that has emigrated from somewhere else and clung to its language beyond 2 generations. In fact, we lose a lot as a nation when people let go of the languages and the culture that came with them. It's a pity that we can't keep more of that going, but it's certainly not a danger to American culture. Sheila, I'll turn it over to you. I know there are lots more we can talk.
Sure. I mean, I guess the thing I could add to that is really that our concept of what we should expect from new immigrants has changed over time as well. So in the past, the United States policy even was complete assimilation. They wanted people to come and be Americans. And the idea was that people should give up themselves and become this thing that nobody could really describe anyway. So, right. And then the concept moved towards acculturation. So meaning that we acknowledge that there's some give and take, right? That people bring things. There's a reason why we all eat pizza, right? We didn't all learn how, like people bring what they bring, and it becomes incorporated into this overall American identity, right? And also there are things that about your own personal families that might be different, and the practices that you maintain in your family that acknowledge where, if your family has immigrated from another place, that heritage, and then also kind of adopting these other kind of more general things. That's acculturation or integration. So integration is the word that we use now, and that you don't have to give up everything, but people do. That's how culture works, is that you take the things that you like and you leave behind the things that, oh, you know what? I think it's better. This is a better way. I want to take my shoes off before I go in the house. It saves me cleaning a lot. And that was a practice I learned when I lived in South Korea. And we still do that at our house. That's how cultural integration works. And I think that's one of the ways that we've changed in our thinking about new immigrants and immigration too.
Great. Well, I thought, what are some success stories that both past and present that have kept your organizations going? You can choose both or focus on past or present.
I'm just flitting through so many. It's hard to choose among them, but one that meant a lot to me personally, and I think Sanal will remember this too, is that there was a refugee from Iran, I believe. No, pardon me, from Afghanistan. She fled over the border into Pakistan when the Taliban first took over most of the country. And she was separated from her young sons at that time. And she came to learn with us for years. And there was just an ever-present sadness. And as she improved in her English, she told this story to us, and we felt so bad for her. But she continued to learn, and she studied for citizenship, and she got citizenship. And then one day she came into the office and she was transformed. She could barely keep her feet on the ground. She was so happy because one of her sons had found her through the internet. Both of their sons were grown by then and living in Scandinavia, and they arranged for her to go and visit. And because she had attained US citizenship, it was possible. And although that's not a great success story in economic terms, in human terms, it just made us so happy to have been bystanders in this transformation in her life. Well, I've got more, but I'm going to let Sheila jump in. And then if there's time, I'll share at least one more.
Sure. One of my favorite stories is revolves around a former staff member at the Asian Center. And his family came to the United States as refugees when he was, I believe, 12 years old, something like that. And he and his sister and his parents used the Asian Center services. And He was part of our youth program. He graduated from high school, went to college at Nebraska Wesleyan, was a Gilman Scholar, went to France to study, and he came back to the Asian Center as an intern and was excited to be here as an intern because his family had used the Asian Center, 10 years ago or 8 years ago, however long it was. And, we enjoyed having him as an intern. And then eventually he became an AmeriCorps member and worked on our youth program for a year. And then, took a break and then served on our board of directors. And then, went on to go to graduate school. And now he's employed as some kind of psychologist, organizational psychologist or something like that. But I mean, what a wonderful success story, right? And that's exactly why we do what we do. That, his parents came here, they had to work that third shift at a plant, I don't know, like meat packing or whatever it was. He and his sister had to do the things that they had to do as kids and like be interpreters for their parents and, just work really, really hard. And they worked hard and that hard work pays off. That's kind of the American dream, right? That success story is what we see all the time.
Indeed. Well, one other quick one, and this is sort of a preview of our winter newsletter because I believe we're going to feature this in the newsletter about to be published. But almost 2 years ago now, we had a refugee from Cuba come in. And in Cuba, we learned she had been an accountant. Now, as you may guess, Cuba doesn't make use of QuickBooks or Peachtree or indeed any accounting software. So she had done accounting using paper and pencil methods. But now here she was in Nebraska as a refugee with her husband and her 7-year-old son. He wasn't yet working. So the only work she could find was at a meatpacking plant in Grand Island. And as we talked in the office downstairs, the tears started to roll down her cheeks because to do that, first of all, it was abhorrent work for her. And let's be honest, somebody has to do that work. But she was a professional with 7 years experience who had to leave her 7-year-old son behind and her husband for 6-week contract periods to go to Grand Island and cut meat all day and then come back with enough for them to live for another month or so until she did it again. Well, I just had to promise her that we were going to help her to improve her life. And I did my best to instill in her the confidence that this would work out for her. Oftentimes, just the willingness to go on is half the battle. And she had the grit to keep doing those horrible jobs, but also to start learning how to be an accountant here in America. Of course, to do that, she had to have a computer. So we equipped her with a Chromebook. We matched her with a CPA, a volunteer who was willing to coach her in the differences between what she'd been trained in Cuba and what she'd need to do here to get that kind of job. Then, of course, the pandemic closed in and everything slowed down in our ability to help her. But I kept in touch with her. Every 2 months, I'd check in and make sure that she was okay. And then finally this spring, when the pandemic receded, if only temporarily, she was able to land a job in her field, and she could not have been happier or more grateful for the little bit that we did. She did 95% of all the hard work that went into it, but we were there able to supply the little missing ingredients in the recipe for success. So I feel very pleased that we were able to have a role in that. But above all, I'm glad for her. And I'm glad for our community, because now another trained professional is at work in her field. And as you may know, we have a great shortage of skilled workers in Lincoln. It's probably our biggest vulnerability as a community. The international population is the best hope of meeting that challenge.
Those are really great success stories. What can we as SCC staff and faculty and SCC students do to help you promote your organizations and make more of those success stories? Sheila, can you start this time?
Sure. I think that we would love to work with all of you in building our community. And we already do, in fact, work with a lot of you in communicating about student needs, also just programs and the things that we can collaborate on in building successful programs for our mutual clients. We have SCC students volunteer at our organization all the time to learn. We even set up times with instructors so that we can set up a special experience for their students to do some work at the Asian Center that would have an impact. And we do that with other universities and colleges too. So really, if you want to help, all you have to do is tell us, and we'll find a way to let you do that and accept your help gladly. Thank you.
All right, well, I have a laundry list. I'm going to start at the top with the most challenging request and come down to the easiest. At the top of the list is you could volunteer to be a Lincoln Literacy tutor. That involves signing up through our website, lincolnliteracy.org, to go through an orientation and training program, because everybody needs a little bit of training to be a successful volunteer tutor. And you can see the details there if you like. If you do it, we ask you for a year's commitment. It's not a short-term thing. It only works when you get to know your students and they get to know you. So that's why I say it's the top of the list. It's the heaviest demand, but it's also the most satisfying. Over 90% of our tutors say they really get great satisfaction out of their volunteer service because they get to know somebody who is really unique in their lives and to make a lasting difference for them. Coming down from there, something else you might do if you're so inclined, and if you have a car and are vaccinated, you could volunteer to give a ride to a newly arrived refugee if they need an additional vaccination, or in some cases for other kinds of appointments as they're getting settled in. The refugee resettlement agencies are really hard pressed now to deal with all of the arriving refugees, and we've been trying to supplement their work with some volunteer rides. And then finally, there's a fairly large international population of students at SCC, and many of them are in certificate programs and may not have had an opportunity to judge or be judged about how ready they are for them. So the failure rate is unfortunately higher than we'd wish it to be. And that can be very discouraging as well as very costly. Lincoln Literacy Tutors can help a person to get through a certificate program that they may just need some help decoding. If you have a classmate or if you have a student who is struggling in a class, all you have to do is reach out to them and let them know they can contact Lincoln Literacy and see if we can find a tutor for them who will be able to help them through the things that they don't understand. I want to give you one example of how difficult it can be if you're a student from a different language background. We have a CNA program that's been highly successful in getting people certified as nursing assistants. But the very first class that we ran in that had people with incredible backgrounds. Some of them had advanced nursing training. They weren't just CNAs, they were actual nurses, and some of them had advanced certifications in nursing. And yet when they took the accreditation test, almost all of them failed on some questions because they had unusual phrases in them. One of them was, which of the following is outside the scope of a CNA's duties? And that phrase, outside the scope, stumped them. They started thinking of stethoscopes. Well, why not? But that's not the meaning. And so they couldn't make sense of it. That's the kind of thing that people need help with in order to be successful. And it's just a tiny thing, but it can make all the difference. Well, with that, I'll stop sermonizing and just say, if you've got the time and inclination, volunteer in some way. Volunteerism is good for you as well as for the people that you help.
I did volunteer for Lincoln Literacy, and it was a great experience. The student I was paired with, she was already a PhD philosophy student from Russia. And we just had fun reading books and discussing them and having conversations. So it was a great experience. But, okay, well, does anyone, I thought maybe we'd open it up to the group if anyone had any questions for our panelists that we didn't address. I thought I'd give anyone a chance to ask you a question if they'd like.
Don't be shy.
While you are thinking, I thought of my question. Can you tell us about new Afghani refugees? Are they coming? How big groups are and so on? Just a little bit.
Well, sure. Yes, they are arriving. About 68 in all have arrived or should be here this week in Lincoln, and another 120 or so are expected by the end of the year. Now, that number includes all the kids, and there are some large families. At Lincoln Literacy, in our collaboration with SCC on the Welcome class, we have 15 Afghan adults in our classes right now. They range from zero English to really very advanced English. And that's kind of what we expected, because the ones who've been working with American forces for a number of years have had a chance and indeed a need to learn to speak English reasonably well. But other family members may not have had any such need or opportunity. The ones that are advanced are eager to get into some useful work here in Lincoln, and we are trying to help them with that. I've been in touch with a couple of engineers among the Afghans already, and we're trying to find pathways forward for them. And we're excited to meet the rest of them in weeks to come.
We got a question in the chat that there was a list put out for things that new refugees would need, but they can't find that information or where to drop that off. Do you guys have that information?
I think the best thing for you to do is contact the resettlement agencies in Lincoln, that they are organizing and setting up places for people to live. And that would be Lutheran Family Services and Catholic Social Services. So they will have the list of what they need right here and now to get that to those families.
Well, if no one else has any questions, was there anything that we didn't ask you that you wanted to share with us at this point?
I just say thanks for having us. And I'm really impressed by the number of people who've joined this. It's a great sign of interest in international education. And I hope that Sheila and I have provided you with something useful to take away.
Yes, that's what I would say too. Thank you so much for having us. And always open to more questions or volunteerism. So just contact us if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for being here. Have a good Monday.